So tonight I want to talk about the three trainings or the three aspects of the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is normally called the Noble Eightfold Path. And for a long time, I kind of had an issue with that. I was like, Noble Eightfold Path, what the fuck does that even mean? And the more I do this practice, the more I'm involved with this practice, the more I come to realize that by staying on this path and by applying the principles that are laid out within this path, you become noble. You become a noble person. At first, I just thought it was kind of some hoity-toity, like, oh, the Noble Eightfold Path. It was, all of the Pali Canon was translated, roughly 150 years ago by some stodgy old British guys. So they're like, oh, the Noble Eightfold Path. You're like, okay, I don't know what you mean, man. But it really just means, like, if we apply these teachings, we become more noble people. And I've seen that firsthand in my life. And it really is a matter of skillful versus unskillful action in the world. This is a path of skilled action and skilled wisdom. And so there are three sections of the Eightfold Path. There are obviously 8 parts of this path, but they're broken up into 3 sections. That's Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Sila is the ethical part of the path, the right speech, right action, right livelihood. Samadhi is the meditation part of the path, which is right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And then Panya is the wisdom part of the path, which is right view or understanding and right intention. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about all of those things and kind of the way the Buddha laid them out, how they kind of work in my life, and why this path is set up the way that it is. So generally, when we look at the Eightfold Path, it starts with right view, right understanding, right intention, which would be the Panya section, the wisdom section of the path. But really, if we're wanting to apply these teachings in a way that actually works, we really have to start with the Sila aspect of the path. So we start with our ethics. We want to make sure that our ethics are in line. And that starts with right speech. And that's one for me that I still have trouble with sometimes. Sometimes I let my reactivity bubble up and I say a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have said. I don't really have a filter sometimes, especially when I'm feeling particularly feisty for some reason, whatever that reason happens to be. But that's one I still struggle with, is I will say some pretty crass shit to people that I care about a lot. And I feel like an asshole when I do that. So I'm calling myself out right now for being an asshole. And the Buddha laid out 4 ways which we can observe our speech to really kind of filter them through. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it timely? And is it helpful? And if it's not true, if it's not kind, if it's not timely, and if it's not helpful, maybe not say it. Like I said, that's one that I still struggle with, especially in the heat of the moment. I was raised by women. And so when particular people want to have really intense conversations with me, my first go-to is to flee. My amygdala response kicks in and I'm like, get the fuck out of here, run away immediately. I can't have this conversation right now. But I'm trying to break myself of that. And so now I've been sticking in it. And then I just, then the fight comes out. And then that's when I become aggressive in my speech and I can be a jerk. And again, something I'm working on. It's a practice. I'm not perfect. Maybe one day, probably not. In all likelihood, probably not. Still probably going to be kind of a dick sometimes. But hey, I'm not necessarily okay with that, but it is what it is. I can only do what I can do. And I'm really trying. I'm really fucking trying really hard. But sometimes it just doesn't work for me. But with mindfulness, it gives us this space, this sacred pause where we have the opportunity to respond rather than just react. But for me, sometimes I forget to be mindful. Sharon Salzberg said that mindfulness is easy as long as you remember to do it. And when you're in the heat of these moments, like sometimes it can just be hard to remember to be like, oh, wait a minute, I shouldn't say that thing. Like I said, that's one of my biggest bugaboos lately is my big fat mouth. I have foot and mouth disease for sure. So that's right speech, samavacha. The next factor of the path is samakamanta. And like I said, these 3 trainings all fall under the Sila aspect of the path. Samakamanta is right action. And in the framework of right action, we really want to look at the 5 precepts. As lay people, we take on 5 precepts when we start on this path. The first of those is not killing or not harming any living being. And I like to view it like this. First, no harm to myself, and then no harm to others. And that can look like a lot of different things. There are certain times where I don't like bugs in my house. And I won't kill them. Most of the time I'll scoop them up and get them outside. But I've had like an ant infestation lately. And it's like, well, what do? I can't scoop up every single ant that comes in and be like, oh, later, buddy. So, I had to put poison out. Do I feel bad about killing the ants? Sure. But I also feel bad about having ants in my house. So a friend of mine lives in Colorado, and he has a prairie dog issue out there. And, sometimes they become rabid. And he has dogs, and he doesn't want his dogs to get bit, so he has to kill these prairie dogs. So, we do the best we can, but we try to not cause harm to any living being. It is the goal to not cause any harm. The second of the precepts is not to take anything that's not freely given. This can be stealing in general. It can also be time, taking people's time, taking people's emotional energy, emotional labor from people. That can be a big one. If it can be pretty heavy dumping a lot of stuff on people when they're not really able to give the space to do it. And then they're like, oh my God, it's so heavy. So that's another way that we really need to look at. Not cheating people, just not lying to people to gain is another way that we take things that's not freely given. So we want to avoid that. The third aspect is not lying. Again, back to speech. No lying, hateful, slanderous speech. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it timely? Is it helpful? That's a good filter. And mindfulness can help us to apply that filter. Like I said, when we can remember to do it. I think the more that we develop a sitting practice, the more likely it is to translate into our normal, everyday, walking through the world lives. Because meditation and daily life are not really separate things. The work really starts when we get off the cushion. This is the training for the rest of the world. It's helpful to be compassionate with our speech. Like I said, sometimes I falter with that. Unfortunately, it's something I'm working on. I have this reactivity. And I think a lot of that comes from this sense of self. If I feel like I am being wronged in some way or I am being taken advantage of in some way, then I'm going to say something about it. Soft heart, strong back. But sometimes the strong back can be a little too strong and a little too mean. And I can be pretty fucking mean sometimes, and that sucks. I don't like being that person. I don't like being that reactive person. And so I do a lot of introspection on that, and that shows up on the cushion for me a lot. The things that I've said to people that could have hurt them, and the things that I have said to people that I know have hurt them, without question. We just have these habituated patterns of reactivity. As I said, I was raised by my grandmother who grew up in the Depression, and she was one of the spare the rod, spoil the child kind of authoritarian parental figures. And so I developed this aversion to really intense conversations with women. And that sucks because I want to be able to talk to my partner. I want to be able to talk to my mother. I want to be able to talk to people without, first of all, wanting to just fucking run away screaming. And because that just generally doesn't go over very well. And if that fails, like I said, then I go to the fight. And I like that even less. So I'm really working on lessening my reactivity around that particular trigger for me. And it sucks that that's a trigger for me, but it is a habituated pattern. This is the way I was brought up. I have certain traumas, and now I have certain triggers that just kind of set me off, and it's something I'm working to address. So the fourth factor of the 5 precepts is no sexual misconduct. And that's a pretty easy one. The Buddha laid out a few pretty easy things to avoid. The first is not sleeping with people outside of your own relationship. If you're in a relationship, probably want to be monogamous unless you have some sort of agreement that things are going to be otherwise. If you're in a polyamorous relationship and that works for you, that's great. As long as it works for you, that's fine. This is your path, not mine. Not sleeping with other people that are in relationships. So if somebody else is in a relationship, probably want to keep to your own business, right? It just is in good form, I think, for us to do that. The third is Not sleeping with children. The Buddha was pretty big to address that. Like, you just don't do that. I don't think I really need to talk anymore about that because we all know that's a no-no. I think everybody in this room can agree that's a big no-no. We don't do that. The next one is preying on the weak or the destitute. People that are in compromised positions, people that are financially compromised, women that are financially compromised, not paying for sex, not preying on people that are drunk or intoxicated, not preying on weak people or people that are in a place of weakness at the time. And really, if we look at Buddhist ethics and we look at Sila, it's really just about being a good person. I mean, we could just say that. Just be a good person. I think we try to strive for healthy relationships, and whether it's a healthy relationship with significant others, whether it's a healthy relationship with friends, whether it's a healthy relationship with ourselves. The most toxic relationship I've ever been in is with myself. And I'm just starting to learn how to come out of that, 41 years it took me. 41. Actually 40. It started last year. So. But the sex thing, it can be a little harder for like lay people, I think, than monastics, because we haven't taken a renunciation of sex. It's in our face. I like sex. Anybody in here does not enjoy sex? Anybody? No? I didn't think so. It's enjoyable. It's desirable. But we want to guard our sin stores. We want to keep mindful of these things. Like, this could be a problem. Things that are enjoyable lead to craving. Craving leads to suffering. And the last one is not taking any substances that lead to heedlessness. Really, if we're going to commit ourselves to this path, then nothing is best. We should be entirely sober, because this whole practice of vipassana really relies on feeling all the sensations of the body to allow this reactivity, the sankharas, to rise to the surface so that they can clear away as everything arising to pass away. So really nothing is best. If you can maintain total sobriety, that's great. Some people find marijuana to be helpful, and it has helped them to get off of harder substances. I'm not here to tell anyone how to live. If weed works for you and it doesn't cause heedlessness, which I've never seen marijuana cause heedlessness for anybody, but I'm sure it can happen, then, do that. If it works for you and it's helping you on your journey, then by all means do it. But I do feel like it's a hindrance to progress on the cushion, because you're not allowing yourself to feel the sensations naturally, because you're feeling it through the filter of marijuana or whatever. Alcohol is definitely a no. I'm going to have to say probably not. I really feel like alcohol is like the worst thing out there. I'm not sure what the statistics are on it, but most murders, most domestic violence occurs because of alcohol. Most arguments occur because of alcohol. Most of the bad shit that happens in the world happens because of alcohol. And for me, alcohol was not my worst problem, but it led me to my worst problem. Alcohol is one of those things that can open up the door to a host of other issues. I'm one of those people that if I start drinking, I'll probably be smoking crack by the end of the night. And that's not good for me. So I just tend to stay away from it. Psychedelics. This is a topic I don't really talk about a lot. I feel like psychedelics have been beneficial in my life at a certain point. And to a certain point, I feel like they can give us insight into some things that maybe we didn't have insight into before, or give us new perspective on issues that we may have in our life that we haven't been able to have a different perspective on. I think it can kind of help us in that sense. There's a massive amount of clinical trials being done as far as psilocybin and depression and PTSD and smoking cessation and a whole host of other things. So like I said, if it works for you, I think with that, it's a set and setting thing. Like I said, I've never had any bad experiences myself. I've had some difficult experiences in the past. I wouldn't call them bad. I don't think there's such a thing as a bad trip. I think there's difficult ones. I think I've learned something from all of them. Again, I'm not here to advocate for it. I'm telling you your path is yours and whatever works for you works for you. I am telling you, you probably shouldn't drink alcohol because I think that's just the goddamn devil. So, and so why do we take these precepts? We take these precepts to stop creating more layers of suffering. It tends to be a little easier. We tend to not have as much bad karmic fruit come back to us if we're just living a good life, a noble life, a moral life. So we don't harm. We don't take things that are not freely given. We don't use harmful speech towards people. And people can include ourselves. Like, I don't know about you guys, but like, I could say some pretty harsh shit to other people, but the shit I have told myself in the past is way worse than anything I've ever told anybody else. Oh man, I've said some horrible things to myself and called myself some horrible things. And that's something that was really hard for me to break out of. And it still flares up from time to time. But it doesn't happen for as long. And that's one thing I can attribute to this practice is even when I get in those depressive states and I start shit-talking myself, work this motherfucker. I don't do it as long. What used to be like weeks of that now is like maybe like an hour or a couple hours. So that it does help. This has helped me in that aspect. But like I said, we take these precepts and it's just a healthy way to live. It's like if we don't do these things, then we won't create any more negative karma. We won't have any more additional suffering. If we're not lying to people, if we're not stealing from people, if we're not hurting people, if we're not cheating on our partner, and we're not getting wasted and doing all of those things, then life will probably be a lot smoother. And I don't know about you guys. I think I've talked about this before, but for me, that's like the first stuff that shows up in my meditation practice is all the kind of morally iffy kind of stuff that I've done recently. It's like, ooh, shouldn't have done that. Or I probably could have handled that situation a little more skillfully. Yeah. The next factor of the path is sama ajila, which is right livelihood. Because what you do for a living matters. Like, is what you're doing for a living leading to harming other people? Is it leading to breaking that first precept? I was offered a job pretty recently at a bar for good money. But because I had committed myself to this path, I turned it down. It would have been an easy job. It would have been 3 nights a week, and I could have made $300 to $400 a night. It's good money. I said no, because I just can't sell people poison, and that's what alcohol is poison. And as I said, most of the horrible shit that happens in the world is fueled by alcohol, a lot of the time, and I can't be a part of that. For me, that is an act of violence in and of itself, is giving people alcohol, because I know what it leads to. I know where it leads to for me, and I know where it leads to for other people because I've seen it. So that's a direct violation of that first precept. I know I can't give somebody that I know is something I know is going to harm them. Same difference. I turned down a job at a cigar shop. Again, good money. I can't sell people tobacco. I know what it does. It kills you. That's an act of violence. So again, right livelihood. Is what you're doing aligned with your values? Does your job align with your values? If not, that's probably going to cause a little bit of mental anguish for you. So maybe watch that. So now we move on to the samadhi part of the path, which is the concentration meditation part of the path. And that starts with right effort. It's like, what does your practice look like? How often do you sit? Do you sit daily? Like this Eightfold path, the way this is laid out is the ethics lead into the samadhi factor, because as I said, this is all the stuff that shows up in our meditation. It's really hard to meditate if we've been out doing scandalous ass shit. But the meditation is such an integral part of this path. It's absolutely necessary. And whether that looks like 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, 2 hours a day, which is like my practice is insane now. After going to that retreat, like I sit 2 hours a day. I sit an hour in the morning and an hour at night. And I make time to do that. I schedule everything else around my meditation practice, because I know that if I don't keep my meditation practice tight, everything else will suffer. And the reason for that is within this practice, especially with this Vipassana practice, the point of it is to let these mental reactions and these sensations that we feel in the body occur and just observe them, not to react to them, not to scratch the itch, not to shift on our seat, not to, like, this is boring and get up, but to really sit with them. And that's why I do such extended meditations, is to really kind of let that stuff bubble up. Because the more it bubbles up, the more we can clear it away. And if we stop generating these new reactions, all the old ones come up to the surface, and we can clear those away too. And eventually, theoretically, we can get rid of all of them and be in this place of equanimity all the time. Which is where I'm trying to be, because, right, like, if you're not meditating for liberation or the liberated mind, what we call chitta vimutti, like, what are we even doing here? You know, like, if I want to be liberated from my own reactivity, like, even if that's just what nibbana is, if it's just me not being a dick when somebody says some shit that bothers me, like, I'll take that. You know, like, if that's nibbana, awesome. I can be perfectly fine with that. And so, like, the Buddha laid out, you know, a pretty specific way to do this in the Satipatthana. And, you know, he affirmed that, you know, within the Satipatthana, he says that this is the direct path of liberation. This is the system of purifying the mind. And this is how we do it. We sit and just we sit with our shit, basically, and just let it be there and go, okay, all right, and just let it bubble up. And that's a basic mindfulness practice. You know, mindfulness that's a word that gets thrown around a lot lately. There's a lot of there's Mindfulness Magazine, got Mindful Recovery, there's Mindful Living, there's Mindful this, Mindful that. Everything's mindful, mindful, mindful. And I think that really lends itself to, like, not really viewing the other part of the path in the light that it should, you know, and the ethics gets left out. And even the other factors of the samadhi part get left out, the effort and the concentration. You're like, oh, just be mindful. Like, oh, well, that's great, but then, and what are we mindful of? You know, the Buddha laid out specific things that we're mindful of in the Satipatthana. Satipatthana just translates as the foundations of mindfulness, which there are 4 of. So within the first one, we're looking at the breath and body. We start with the breath, just like we did in the meditation. We use the breath as our anchor because the breath is an easy anchor to find. We don't have to go looking for it. We can easily pay attention to the breath. So the Buddha said placing mindfulness in front of us. And he really meant placing mindfulness in front of us, right here, and just feeling these sensations, like feeling the arising and the passing of these sensations. Then he moves on to the body. He talks about 32 specific parts of the body, which I'm not going to go into because it gets pretty gross. He talks about the body hair and the skin and the eyes and the teeth and the spleen and the appendix and the feces and the urine and all the parts of the body that we meditate on. And that moves into mindfulness of feeling tone. It's Vedana. Vedana is just the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral quality of any experience. Anything that we experience in this life is going to have one of those qualities to it. We're either going to like it, we're not going to like it, or we're just like, whatever. And I'm trying to get to the place where everything's kind of like, whatever. Because then we don't cling to things. We don't crave. We don't want to hold on to the good because we know everything is impermanent. By clinging to anything, good or bad, we're really doing ourselves a disservice because everything is impermanent. So knowing that the good times are going to pass, we don't cling to them. Knowing that the bad times are going to pass, we don't push them away. We sit with them, and that's compassion, right? It's just holding that pain. Saying, yeah, you can be here too. For just a little while. You'll go away. And with Vedana, we can talk about the 5 aggregates. So the 5 aggregates are essentially, in a Buddhist framework, what comprise a human being. The first of them being form, or the body, which I've addressed. And then the other 4 are actually mental factors. So we have consciousness. And consciousness occurs when an object meets a sense door. Now, the sense doors in the Dharma framework are the normal faculties of sense: sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing, and the mind. We include the mind within the aggregates, or within the sense doors. So object sense door creates consciousness. Consciousness then leads us to our perception. When we perceive things, we all perceive things in a different way. But then that leads to this feeling tone. And our feeling tone, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, leads us to our mental reactions, or sankhara. this is where the rubber meets the road, is within this feeling tone and sankhara. Because if, as I said, if something is pleasurable, we're going to want to hold on to it, because that is just the human nature. If something sucks, we want to get rid of it. Ouch, get away from me. Pain sucks. Nobody likes being in pain. Some people. But we'll talk about them again when I do another talk on sexual misconduct. Actually, I don't know if that's misconduct, if it's consensual, right? But like I said, this can lead to a lot of craving and aversion. So we really want to pay attention to this feeling tone, right? The pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Because that's what gives rise to all of our reactions. The mosquito bite that you don't even think about it, you swat it away. Like, oh. We have all these little micro aversions and all these little micro cravings. We get bored and we pick up our phone to satiate our boredom. Or we swat the mosquito away or scratch the itch while we're meditating rather than just sitting with it and letting it pass on its own. But all things do pass. The next factor of the samadhi part is wise concentration, or sama-samadhi. Like, are we focusing on the right things? Are we meditating correctly? I know I've said before that there's no right or wrong way to meditate, but there are more productive ways to meditate than others. And this act of this vipassana, this insight, or seeing things as they truly are, it's really just experiencing reality as it is. Your reality. Not mine, yours. During your practice. While we sit, just feeling the sensations, hearing the sounds, smelling the smells, experiencing reality in this moment. So are we concentrating on the right things? Are we doing the right meditations? Are we getting off track with our letting the mind wander? Are we getting lost in thought? Or are we staying focused on the actual meditation itself and the practice? Are we getting caught up in the planning, the grasping, the aversion? And so it's through this meditation practice, it's by sitting and letting these sensations arise, noting this feeling tone, observing all these sensations, observing the thoughts, observing how they arise, how they pass away, how sensations arise, and how they pass away, that we arrive at panya, or wisdom. This understanding, this right understanding, or I don't even like the word right, really, for that translation. It's more like complete. And it's this deep understanding of impermanence. It's knowing that everything that arises passes away. All the good things, there's no point in clinging to them because they will end. All the bad things, there's no point in overreacting to them because they too will end. And it's not personal, We are constantly changing. We have changed as people since we've been in this room. At a cellular level, we have changed. The mind has changed. The body has changed since we've been here. There's no static self in the Dharma framework. We're just a collection of arising and passing subatomic particles in a constant flux. So we can get in trouble with identification, calling ourselves certain things. It's one of the things that really bothers me within the framework of the 12-step model is having to say, oh, I am an alcoholic, or I am an addict. Because from a Buddhist perspective, from a Dharma perspective, I'm not anything. Addiction is something that I have experienced, but I'm not an addict. From a Dharma perspective, really everyone's an addict. It's the human condition. Because we cling to pleasure. It's what we do. And it's not our fault. We got bad programming. That's all it is. And the next factor is intent. Right intention. So we look at our intention when we do things. Do we have the right intention? Are we doing things for our personal gain or because it's the right thing to do? I can kind of give the simile of, say there's a robber and he's stealing somebody's wallet, and he stabs somebody in the stomach. He stabs him in the stomach, and the guy dies. And then there's a surgeon who's performing surgery, and he's incising, and the guy flatlines and dies. Right? Same thing. They both cut the person, and they both died. The only difference there is the intention. One person is trying to steal and hurt someone. and the other person was trying to help someone. So our intention is really what affects our karma. If something is done with ill intent, bad karmic fruit will follow. If it's done with right intention, more likely than not, good will come. So we really want to monitor that. And like I said, this is a system of training. This is a training of the mind, and a training just of our way in the world. This is a training of how to live in the world and be more productive, happier people. Seems pretty legit to me. And I know that it works, I know that it has efficacy just because of the way it's shown up in my life. At one point I was a homeless heroin addict. And I owe a lot of where I'm at today, or where I'm not at, to this practice, honestly. Because it's by living by this Eightfold Path and applying these principles and doing the meditation and working through my own shit that I've come to a place where I'm probably happier than I've ever been. And that's pretty amazing to be able to say, honestly. To be able to say that I'm happy at all is pretty fucking amazing, because at one point I could not say that. But happier than I've ever been, that's pretty lofty. And it's pretty true. So I implore you, if you don't have a dedicated sitting practice, even if you can only find 5 minutes a day, sit for the 5 minutes. Try to sit 5 minutes and do that for 2 weeks. See how it goes for you. If it goes well, bump it up to 10. If you can only do 2 minutes at first, start at 2 minutes, whatever works for you. Just whatever you can fit in, whatever's comfortable. But it really does pay off. And I know that because it's paid off for me. So let's all stop looking at the menu and let's eat the food.